This is a show for grown-ups.
And they say bad words.
And they say bad words.
Say final warning.
Final warning.
Hello and welcome to the Pot of Blunders. My name is Nate Magnuski, and I'm here with Eric Parker of Maps and Quests. Eric, how the hell are you?
I am just spectacular. Sunshine and daisies, puppy dogs and rainbows. Getting to talk to you, so that's always a good time.
I hear. I've never had the privilege, so I wouldn't know.
I talk to myself all the time. You sometimes need expert advice.
It's the smartest conversation you'll have all day. Absolutely.
Exactly.
So let's jump right into it. What got you into RPGs as a hobby?
So RPGs as a hobby, God, that was, I don't even want to say, a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. When growing up in a rural town in Georgia, one of my friends, me being a nerd, nerds were a scarcity, invited me to play this game that his dad taught him, Dungeons and Dragons. And I said, dragons, I like the sound of that. And then I played on and off for, God, it's been 25 years now, probably. So I have memories of, 2E and Thaco and all that fun jazz. I saw your eye twitch just a little bit.
Thaco and me are not friends. Never have been, never will be. How did that branch into making maps professionally?
So how it branched into making maps professionally, I started a little while ago being a dungeon master again. I hadn't actually run a game in probably close to 10 years. And we'll cut a long story short. There was a bad experience that some newer players to the game had in a game that I was actually playing in. Campaign eventually kind of fell apart, that sort of thing. And I said, God, I really want to run a campaign again. It's been a while. It's been too long. So I started asking a couple of people, hey, would you want to play if I ran a game, that sort of thing? And they're like, yeah, sure, we'd like to play again. We were kind of starting to really enjoy it, but then things fell apart. So that's actually what got me into the map making end of things, because I ran into some issues, I guess is one way to put it, where I couldn't find maps online that really did kind of what I wanted them to do, if that makes sense. So I started tinkering around different ways I could make maps, different software that I could use, that sort of thing. Me being an IT guy, I, of course, love dabbling in software and testing out everything I can. Because that kind of comes with the territory there, right?
Yeah.
So started kind of tinkering around with that. And I started kind of putting the maps in front of my players, using them in the VTT, since we were playing over Discord, because one of my players lives 1,100 miles away from me. So thank God for the internet, right?
Yeah, really.
So started dabbling there, putting it in front of my players, and one player is 1,100 miles away from me. He's also my most experienced player in this campaign. He's actually been playing longer than I have. He said, you could probably start selling these. I've definitely seen worse maps than these for sale online. As I guess. Yeah. And a couple of my other players had something to similar effect. And I basically said, I'm going to need you all to make an intelligence saving throw against insanity. That's what I'm going to need right now. Not your characters, you personally. So I kind of honed it, started testing the waters. And then back in November, I kind of started saying, I looked at the maps that were out there, looked at kind of what I was doing a little differently, kind of how I made my maps. I said, you know what? Fuck it. Let's give it a go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of talked to my wife about it and said, I want to try this. It's probably not going to, make us rich. But at the same time, we have a 2-year-old daughter. Daycare and diapers aren't cheap. Mm-hmm. So there's that.
Amen, brother.
You've experienced that pain.
Yeah. Yes. I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, so I completely understand.
So, and that's kind of what brought me into the map making end of things professionally. When, I got my first patron on Patreon, my one player who told me, who was really the first one who started being like, yeah, you should try this. He was like, well, you can call yourself a professional now. Somebody has given you money for a map. You can officially say you're a professional. I'm like, yeah, I feel like that's a little bit of a stretch. So that's how I kind of got into the map making end of things. It's, wild, random, coincidental. Discovered I had kind of a knack for it, apparently, which I was like, oh, hey, look, something remotely artistic that I'm good at. I'm not used to this feeling. This is kind of odd.
I was going to ask, like, do you have a background in art, or was this like out of left field for you?
Kind of out of left field. Being in IT, I've had my fair share of like web dev classes and that sort of stuff. In my current job, my current employer, I've somehow kind of become our graphic designer too. Not quite sure how that has happened, but I guess like, oh, you run the website, you can do graphic design too, as my cat makes an appearance.
Yay.
So a little bit of background there. So I've got, some knowledge of colors and how those sorts of things work. By no means going to say, oh, I'm professionally trained as a graphic designer and graphic artist, because I'm most certainly not. So yeah, really kind of out of left field, but it's also, for me at least, it's a good artistic outlet too, something to do there. And as I, explained to my wife when I kind of started on this path, for the campaign I'm running, I'm making a lot of maps anyway. And so it's not like it's that much extra time being eaten up, other than, I do more variants for the Patreon than I do for my campaign, because I'm not going to throw the same map at my players in 4 different states in one session. I could if I really wanted to mess with them and start talking about extra planar stuff, but
you got to save something for the higher levels,
Exactly. Oh, that tavern you're in, it's in the Feywild now. Congratulations. Everything wants to kill you.
Yeah. The chair, it's a mimic chair. Deal with it.
Mimic. Everything's a mimic.
Everything.
Actually, threw my first mimic at them last week.
Congratulations. It's a special time in a man's life.
Like they were expecting it with the it's a cave, but dungeon they were in after they'd found a couple of chests in a row. They're like, God, one of these is going to be a mimic. One of these is going to be a mimic. Well, yes, one of them's going to be a mimic, but yeah, I'm not going to tell you which one.
Not until your arm's being chewed off, then you'll know.
when it has, when it's attached to you, then you'll know it's a mimic.
So I had another guest on last night. I was talking to him about silver linings with the pandemic and the hobby. And one of the things we talked about was the proliferation of online battle maps and how they're using the virtual tabletops. Do you think that has a positive effect on your business?
Oh, absolutely. It does. I know quite a few of my patrons are using them in a virtual tabletop setting. I know that beyond a shadow of a doubt. Yeah. It's one of those kind of specific reasons why I make the maps in both, the gridded and gridless versions, because I have felt the pain of trying to line up the grid on a map with the grid in Roll20. I have felt that particular pain, and I would not like someone else to experience that. I'm just throwing it out there.
Bless you.
So yeah, it definitely has. And, not just me, but, I think most other kind of fantasy cartographers out there have definitely seen a big boost because of that, and how it's changed things for how a lot of people play. I know I actually had a tweet about it the other day, because I know so many people are using virtual tabletops now. A couple of years ago, you really just had like Roll20. That was your option. You want to use a VTT, you got Roll20. Now there are at least 5 that I can name off the top of my head. I follow another creator on Twitter who is creating another one. So they're getting a whole slew of options out there, which I think is fantastic. The more choices people have, the better, because everyone's going to do something slightly differently, just like with making the battle maps. No 2 map makers are doing everything the exact same. Everyone's doing something a little bit differently. So I think it's a good thing for choice, so that people have options to compare from.
And there are a lot of cartographers out there. There's a lot of people making maps. What makes yours stand out against the sea of map makers out there?
The sea is a good word there. It is a veritable sea of map makers out there. Just one of the things that I do differently, and this is largely inspired by how my party likes to play, is making my maps a little bit bigger than what was typically out there. That was something else when I first started making the maps, when I alluded to earlier having problems finding things that kind of fit my party's play style. When they're in combat, even if it's, against a group of 20 bandits, they like to get super tactical. My rogues are rolling for stealth every chance they can get and trying to sneak through trees. My party's adopted the basic tactic of the cleric and the fighter just stroll right up and try and distract the bandits, while my 2 rogues try and kind of sneak around into flanking position. And a lot of the maps that I saw out there are like maybe like a 20 by 20 grid. And that's really hard with that sort of play style for that size map and that play style to work well together. So that was kind of first thing that I see that I think I do it a little bit differently there is making the maps bigger. The smallest map I've published recently was 50 by 35 grid. The other thing with the bigger maps and doing them differently, and why I personally think it's a boon, is if you have a map that's too big, it's easy to make that map smaller for what you need. You can always crop it down. It's really hard to make a small map bigger and have scale still work in a way that's functional, where you don't have, a bed that your entire party can lay on at the same time type of thing.
This is a Giants village now. Yeah.
Congratulations. You thought you were fighting halflings? You're fighting frost giants. Wait a second. And then also with, the bigger maps, my cleric took the spell sniper feat at level 4, which in 5e, the spell sniper feat is one of my top 5 favorite feats. It is absolute money. If you're listening to this, watching this, and you don't know what the spell sniper feat is, look it up and you're going to be in love with it. Guaranteed. If you're an attacking caster and not a utility caster, you're going to love it. And that's the other thing on, some of the smaller maps is it's hard for that sort of attacking capability to really be terribly useful on a smaller map as well. Because, with the spell sniper feat, you can hit a target from 240 feet away. And I can do the math on that for you. A 20 by 20 grid, the furthest away you're going to be from something is at most like 125 feet. So that feat's kind of useless, or at least half of that feat is useless at that point in time. So this is all going back to how I make maps kind of revolves around my party. But I also think that if I had this problem, there's no way in hell I'm the only person who's had this problem. So I think that's one of the bigger things with kind of how I do my maps a little bit differently. The other thing I try and do with my maps is I try very specifically to make them generic enough, if that statement makes sense, to where you could take one of the variants that gets released every week and drop it into pretty much any medieval or fantasy / high fantasy campaign setting without a lot of muss and fuss from your dungeon master or game master. So that's the other thing I think I do a little bit differently there, is I do see a lot of maps out there that, in no means trying to poo-poo on anybody, that I personally had a hard time finding a way to make that map work in my campaign, just because there is almost too much detail.
With that said, I don't think your maps are, I want to make sure our listeners know that they're not like a flat affix kind of map. There's tons of elements in them, but they're not hyper specific to a certain setting.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I do a lot with, lighting and creative lighting. Yeah. Like I have a couple map variants that are Feywild variants. One where a town has basically fallen into ruin and there's crevasses where the streets are crumbling into the sewers and weird green light is escaping from the holes and that sort of thing. But I also have that same map. I have, a simpler variant where it's just a regular old merchant district in a city. There are shops in that merchant district. There's a restaurant, there's a bar, that sort of thing. Standard fare. But I think my maps are pretty. I'll give them that. But at the same time, I'm trying to remember. I saw another map maker said something on Twitter the other day, and I can't remember who it was. Something to the effect of, a good map being kind of the intersection of art and storytelling and usability, that sort of thing. And that's kind of what I aim for with my maps, is that they look good, but they're also, usable, and you can tell a story with that map with your players.
I was looking through your maps and I saw some of them had like a nighttime variant. So as time passes, you can swap out the map. It's the same map, but the lighting is done for you. And that's honestly, I'm like, that's like just a clever, simple thing to do. And it works so well. It makes it more alive. It makes it alive to me.
Yeah, sometimes it would be basically, a similar map, and there's a winter version. So your party comes back through this town or that sort of thing. But, however time works in your particular world, be it Faerun or your homebrew world or wherever, that it's winter there now. Okay, cool. You now have the same town with snow on the ground, and you don't have to do any extra work for it.
It's such a simple idea, but it's so effective. It's like increasing verisimilitude for the game, which is my ultimate goal, and a lot of goals for a lot of dungeon masters out there.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
so good. Yeah.
Because when your party's traveling around from location to location, that you're probably going to hit the same spot a couple of times, just in your travels, going from one corner of the kingdom to the other and back, and that sort of thing. You got decent odds of hitting the same spot at the same point in time, and I'm assuming that time moves in a relatively similar linear fashion in your world to how it moves here on Earth, but I could be wrong. Maybe you're doing crazy things with time travel in your world. I don't know. That's one of the beauties of D&D is you can do that, or TTRPGs in general. You can do that and get away with it because nobody questions it, because magic.
Hand wavium, it all happens. How does it work? Magic. Who knows?
Exactly.
Stop asking.
It was the older editions, the weave. In older editions of D&D. Yeah. I just kicked it back a couple of years there for everyone listening or watching.
Someone had like a nostalgic moment, like, oh my God, I remember the weave. You triggered some people back there.
So he's like, wait, what? Now they're going to start crying in Thaco in a second.
He cites the deep magic, the weave.
I was there when it was written.
Yeah. I was looking up some of your stuff on Drive-Thru RPG. That's great. But I have to say, your Patreon has to be the greatest deal for anybody looking to increase their map collection on the internet right now.
Yeah, I think it's one of the better ones out there. I know there's been a bit of a race to the bottom, if you will, in the fantasy cartography world with pricing lately. And I'm not trying to encourage a race to the bottom even further. But at the same time, I look at it as, I do put a lot of time and effort into the maps. So I'd like to, get something back for them monetarily, even though, I do release a free one on the Patreon every Friday, or most every Friday, that sort of thing. The ones on Drive-Thru RPG for the most part are pay what you want. I don't have all of the maps that are on the Patreon on there yet because that's a time-consuming process of uploading them to 2 different locations. I also am doing that pricing because I want my maps to be in the hands of people too, where they can use them and they can experience them, because I do understand to an extent as well that financially times aren't the greatest for everyone right now. Like I'm fortunate to be in the position I'm in with my real life job, as I like to call it, where I've been working from home for over a year now, that I still have a job and I can do that safely without risking my life. I've had to go into the office a handful of times, even though my office has been closed because, a server went down or something like that. But I want to try and get the maps into the hands of people at a price where they're affordable, where it's a good value for people too. Just because I know for me, at least during the COVID times, that having D&D as kind of a release, if that makes sense, as a form of escapism, has been a really big boon for my personal mental health. Because I will tell you, the first I don't remember how many months it was of the pandemic, when my daughter's daycare was closed and my wife and I were both trying to work from home before her office opened back up and she had to go back in. And we had 1.5-year-old at that point in time running around, getting into absolutely everything. Our daughter, who we love, but we have lovingly nicknamed Danger Baby, because she will find whatever the most dangerous thing is and do it. That's just her MO. Earlier tonight, she climbed up on an end table and vaulted over the side of the couch.
Oh my God, is she okay?
Yeah, she's fine. She landed on the couch. She went
okay.
Couchways onto the cushions. But yeah, she was a solid 2 feet up in the air, and then she just laughed her head off the entire time. Thought it was hysterical. So incredibly stressful time for everyone. So I know, TTRPGs and D&D specifically, because that's kind of more my go-to TTRPG, because it's the one that I've been playing the longest and most familiar with, have been a great boon for my mental health during that time. So, if I can, maybe help somebody out a little bit there with pricing on those things so that they can enjoy it, maybe get into being a dungeon master or that sort of thing, then yeah, absolutely. It just feels like in my mind kind of the right thing to do. Or at least as right a thing as I can do with it. That's kind of there and why I'm doing that as well, is try and help out and give back where I can in some way, shape, form, or fashion, even if it's as small as the free maps I put up on the Patreon. I mean, those are there. They're free to use. They're simpler, more basic maps, but they're still there. They're still free. They're still, 70 PPI resolution, which is perfect for Roll20 and virtual tabletops.
They're great. The one I was looking at one today, actually, it was the one with it was a swamp map with a little boardwalk that was going through it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I was like, it's such a simple thing, but I have a thousand ways I can use this in like every
Mhm.
game I've run the past year. Like it's
Yeah.
such a they're great, and I think they really illustrate. They're not so simple that they're not usable. They're wonderful and they're illustrative of your ability.
Thank you. Yeah, and that particular map, I know exactly which map you're talking about. So here's a fun fact: all of my maps, my party either has experienced or will have experienced by the time this campaign is over in some way, shape, form, or fashion. So that particular map, the party was escorting a merchant caravan from one city to another, because that's a nice low level party task. For an entry level quest before you start throwing various side quest options at them, that sort of thing. And they took the northern trade road because they thought, oh, well, all the bandit attacks have been happening on the southern trade road. The northern trade road will be safer, probably. Well, no, it's just there are nastier things on the northern trade road that the bandits didn't want to have to deal with. So in that particular swamp, the party got ambushed by lizard folk. That's also where my cleric, who is a Kalashtar cleric, used the Kalashtar telepathy to speak to the lizard folks' riding lizard, and through successful animal handling checks made that her mount, so she rides around on a giant lizard now.
That's awesome.
One of my rogues almost got killed by an enormous tentacle, which is one of my favorite monsters in the monster manual, solely based on description. It can reach anywhere in this room. That's part of the description. And then they faced a swamp hag towards the end because they just hit level 4. And I kind of used that as an idea because a lot of the players in this campaign are newer. They haven't played that much. The last campaign they played in, the DM started like level 8, which that's one of those things I'm like, how'd you pick that level? That's
really. That's like smack in the middle of heroic. That's not even
that's like
weird.
5 I would understand.
Sure.
That's cool. 10 or 11, cool. 8.
Yeah.
Whatever. Not my campaign.
Right.
So actually I started them at level 1 so that they could get a better idea of, what building a character actually looks like. So that's something I like to do with newer players, not to be too much. I'm a teacher dungeon master, but
okay.
it works for kind of helping people understand as they're building their character, why they're making the choices they're making. So they just hit level 4, and I use that particular session kind of as a way to introduce them to the idea that you're starting to creep up there in levels. The things that you're facing are going to start getting a little bit nastier. They're going to hit you harder. This is where you start getting to the levels like the enormous tentacle, where if it hits you and grapples you, you're auto grappled. And on your next turn, if you don't break the grapple, you just take 2d6 bludgeoning damage. You just take it. There's no save. There's nothing. You just take it. Just take it on the chin.
You had a chance. You biffed it. No, it's tentacle time.
So, but yeah, that's actually exactly what I used that map for. So
that's what you get for being level 4. Sorry about it. Can you walk me through the levels of your Patreon that you have offered right now?
The big one is the Legion tier, if you will. That's the one that I'm kind of pushing because it's the best value. So with the Legion tier, that works out to $2 in US dollars. For our international audience, that's £2, €2, or $3 Australian or Canadian dollars.
Good to know.
You just get our exchange rates in there, so we all know what we're talking about.
Now, in Turkish lira, how many is that in Turkish lira?
I'm just going off the currencies that I know Patreon supports. So with that, we'll say $2 US plus all the other currencies, because I'm not going to say those every single time. I'm not. So with that, you get 4 map variants in each map pack I release. Each of those variants you get in day and nighttime versions. There's a gridded and gridless version of each of those. And then there's the 256 PPI, which is more of your print resolution version. And then there's your 70 PPI, which is your virtual tabletop resolution. 256 PPI usually is fine for printing for most people's purposes, if you will. So that's kind of the big one, because that's obviously the best value. That also offers the same benefits as the, I kind of made up the names of these as I went along. I should probably change them, but I'm sticking with them for now because I've got too much other stuff going on. The Dungeon Demigod tier, which is the second most expensive tier. That's $5 US per month. I don't remember all the exchange rates on that because they vary a little bit there. Because that's not the big one I want to talk about right now anyway, because I want people to get the value. It basically, that's the exact same tier basically as the Legion, but more expensive. If you want to sign up for it and give me more money, I'm cool with that. Go for it.
And people should, yep.
But I want you to get the value. I really do. Not trying to rip people off here. I want to make sure you're aware of all the options. Then the tier underneath that is the Dungeon Overlord tier, which is $4 a map pack. That gets you 4 map variants. Oh, I forgot to mention with the Legion and Dungeon Demigod tiers, you get weather effects overlays as well. Those are PNGs that are sized for the map so that if you want to add a more active weather condition to the map, since it's a PNG and it has opacity, you can just slide it right over top and boom, now it's snowing or thunderstorm or foggy or, whatever other weather conditions I make to go along with.
So cool. Yeah.
Which actually, so if somebody's using Foundry, I know Foundry actually supports a layer above the player tokens. Which is one of the reasons I want to look into Foundry. I think there's another one out there that does as well, and I can't remember what it is. I know Roll20 doesn't, but I know Foundry does. That actually supports a layer above the tokens, so that would actually work really well there if you're using Foundry, where you can just, boom, weather effect. It's snowing now. Congratulations. Make a Constitution saving throw so you don't freeze to death. So the Dungeon Overlord tier gets basically everything that the Legion and Dungeon Demigod tiers get, minus the weather overlays. The Dungeon Maestro tier gets 1 less map variant than the Dungeon Overlord tier. Then there is the Dungeon Master tier, which gets 2 map variants. You still get all the map variants in gridded, gridless, high, low res, day, night, all that fun jazz. Then at the same price as that, there's what I call the Creative Player tier, which is just the weather effects overlays.
Oh, okay.
So there's a tier where you can get just the weather effects overlays, which is the same price as the Legion tier and the others. So I don't know why you'd do that if you could do the Legion tier at the same price and get the maps too. But maybe you're like, I don't want maps. I just want PNGs of weather. If that's your jam, that's your jam. Go for it. Have fun. And then the tier underneath that is the player tier that gets 1 map variant. And once again, in the day, night, gridded, gridless, high, low res, all that fun jazz. That tends to be a quote unquote more basic map variant. Basic is obviously a relative term here, and you're still getting a pretty decent map. You've seen some of the work. Mm-hmm. So basic is a relative term here, but that's going to be your tier where you're basically, you're getting a map in woodland / pasture, green grass, that sort of thing. The other tiers are where you start getting into now it's the base map, but now suddenly I've put it on a tropical island where you have beach and palm trees, or it's the similar map and now it's in winter and the lake's frozen over, that sort of thing.
I mean, there's no bad maps. It's not like you make bad maps. So
yeah,
basic is not like.
If I was hand drawing my maps, then they would be bad. There's a reason that I do pretty much all of this digitally. When it comes to hand drawing, it is not my forte. Versus if I make a mistake digitally, I can just erase it real quick.
Like if you're on the wrong layer,
erase. Wrong layer, erase. That's fine. You've been on the wrong layer more times than I care to count.
So I have a confession to make. By and large, I'm a narrative RPG player.
That's fine.
But I have another secondary related, like nesting confession to make, and that is my favorite edition of D&D is 4E.
4E, wow.
Because that's what it got me so into tactical combat. And it's not what I want all the time, but when I want that to scratch that itch, I bust out my 4E books.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where how my party likes to play, 4E I feel like might be a better option than 5E, but there's no D&D Beyond for 4E.
No, there's not.
It's one of those things where, God, it just makes it so darned easy, both as a player and a DM.
Yeah.
It's so darned easy.
Every little Rolodex of powers you get to flip through and see what you want to do.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to do any. They don't have to flip through a book. God, I remember back in 3.5E, there was a company called Hero Forge, not the Hero Forge that we know now who makes minis, but a separate company of the same name who put out kind of tools and supplements, if you will. And one of the products that they made was a spreadsheet where you could do character creation in the spreadsheet. Similar idea to something like D&D Beyond. I actually have a copy of that spreadsheet somewhere in my Google Drive, but it was still a very clunky process.
Sure.
And it's also, it's like 3.5E with all the various supplement books that came out. Oh my God, the laundry list of feats was absolutely absurd. It was, from that standpoint, it was a very crunchy game.
And not balanced whatsoever after like the third year of production. It was wild.
No, not even a little. But my favorite thing I like to throw out there as an example of something you could do in 3.5E, aside from the Ranger, which I'll go on a Ranger tangent later if you want me to.
Yes.
I could build a sorcerer in 3.5E who at level 11, once a day through metamagic feat stacking, could throw Scorching Ray out for 48 d6 damage if all of the rays hit.
My God.
That you have the potential to, one round 60, 70 something percent of the monster manual at that point in time, if not more, at level 11. Like that's where 3.5E. And if somebody's listening who loves 3.5E, please don't take this as me hating on 3.5E. If that's the game you love to play that game. Play whatever game you love to play.
Absolutely.
That's my take on it. If you love 3.5E, it's not for me, because at that point in time, once I've figured out mechanically how to break the game in that way, it's not fun for me anymore. Me personally, that's just me. So if you love 3.5E, play 3.5E. Have fun. Enjoy the game. Whatever way you want to play it. It's just that particular version. Because of that, that's when I started to kind of fall out of love with 3.5E, was just how easily you could break the game in that way. Rangers were similar, except you didn't have to take a lot of extra feats to break the game with Rangers in 3.5E. 3 and 3.5E Rangers were possibly, in my personal opinion, the most OP non-prestige martial class.
Go on the tangent. Go.
So this is the stupid hill that I will die on. Everyone has a stupid hill that they'll die on. This is my stupid hill that I will die on. Between 3E and 5E, when it was published, because Ranger has gotten marginally better through things like Tasha's and Xanathars, etc.
Yeah.
But from 3E to 5E Player's Handbook, Ranger was the hardest nerfed class in that time frame. Now,
get no argument from me. Absolutely.
I understand why it needed nerfing, because like Rangers back in like 3.5E got evasion, and I think it was like level 7 or 8, if I'm recalling correctly.
It was early, yeah.
And by like level 9 or 10, with just because of free feats they got just for being a Ranger, if you selected the archery fighting style. Thanks, Driz, for making Rangers that iconic. Didn't think you were going to get a Driz reference today, but you did.
It's on my bingo card, so thank you for that.
I'm pretty sure if I'm recalling correctly, it was like level 9 or 10. Just through free feats that they got just for being a Ranger, you could like throw out 12 arrows around, because you got like mini shot as a free feat. And combine that, with dex and base attack bonus and all that other fun stuff. If you throw in like the greater mini shot feat, you're rolling a separate attack die for each of those arrows. They just absolutely insane stuff. But there's my Ranger tangent. That is the stupid hill that I will die on, is that Ranger was the hardest nerf class between 3E and Player's Handbook 5E. Every class got nerfed going into 5E, but every class kind of had to be nerfed because all the monsters got nerfed so hard too.
But it's not a stupid tangent if you're right. So
fair. Is it a hill worth putting this much effort into? That's the real question.
No, you can go through your whole life asking that question about everything, and sometimes you just gotta say the Ranger's broken and got unbroken and then rebroken because of that. I support your quests for the gospel of the Ranger.
So yes, that's also Ranger was my favorite class to play and back in the day, if you will. And I still enjoy playing a Ranger. There was another podcast, and once again, I can't remember who said it. I remember reading it on Twitter, where they did a really deep dive into the development of the Ranger in 5e and kind of what it looked like. And once again, I can't remember which podcast it was. So if you're watching this or listening to this, please comment with the podcast that said this, if you know which one it was. that their basic take on it, looking at it, was that Wizards of the Coast, in building the 5e Ranger, tried to kind of separate the combat elements of the Ranger from the more natural outdoors person elements of the Ranger.
Sure.
And make them kind of two separate things, when really they kind of, you have to have both of them for a Ranger to actually work. Like if we look at the most iconic non-Dungeons and Dragons Ranger in history, Aragorn, there's not a weapon that man couldn't use, and there wasn't anything he couldn't track.
Absolutely.
So there's my Ranger hill. I'll step off my soapbox now. Everyone listening, I apologize for my soapbox, but it's my stupid hill that I'll die on. So you can all make fun of Eric from Maps and Quests for having the stupid hill that he'll die on being Ranger got nerfed hardest.
But you're right, though. For 5th edition Rangers, it was like, we're going to make them the expert at one of the 3 pillars of the game. We're going to have them the master of the exploration pillar. That pillar sucks. You don't get XP for that. Your game is about killing things. You need to make your character good at killing things. Otherwise, you need to reward them some other way to advance them. And
especially how they wrote, the Dungeon Master's Guide for 5e. There's very scant text in the 5e DMG for awarding XP for anything that is not combat and fighting.
Yeah.
For anything that does not involve killing something else. There's very scant text in the 5e DMG for that. Like that's why, like if you do a Google search for how to award XP for traps, there are 50 million theories out there on how to do it in 5e, because Wizards just didn't cover it. And part of that, I think, also was Wizards trying to simplify the game for 5e, which I get and I understand, and I don't think that was a bad idea by any means. No. I think that simplification of the game between 4e and 5e helped a lot with the explosion in popularity of D&D over the last 5 to 6 years, because it's an easier, more approachable game than it used to be.
I was reading somewhere that more people are learning D&D and about D&D now from podcasts and actual plays like Critical Role than like you and I probably learned like from someone's big brother, or because you found a red box somewhere and you're like, what is this? But now that paradigm has shifted. Now it has to be approachable because you have to make an entertainment out of it to sell it to the next generation of players. Absolutely. Which is not a problem. It's not a problem at all. But
it's not something that well, and it is something that kids are, playing until 3 a.m, hopped up on Mountain Dew and eating pizza. No, I never did that. That never happened.
No, of course not.
Not once. I never did. I made responsible choices, and I went to bed at a reasonable time, just like I do now.
Yes,
I was not up until 1 a.m. last night figuring out how to package my own assets for Dungeon Draft, my custom assets. That's another project that I'm working on.
And again, and not a euphemism. Just I want to put that out there.
Yes, not a euphemism. There's actually a process where you can take things that you have made in GIMP or Photoshop or some other photo editing program, and you can make them an asset for the Dungeon Draft program so that other people can use them in Dungeon Draft.
Super cool.
That's my next project I'm working on.
All right.
So back to where we were before I went off on my tangent. I warned you about this.
That's okay.
The tangents.
I embrace it.
Embrace it and just run with it. It's fine. Is that simplification and then you run the actual play, the podcasts and the Twitch streamers and people putting their games on YouTube, that sort of thing. All of that's kind of combined to make D&D really, 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 really popular. I mean, it was always kind of the 800-pound gorilla, if you will, in the TTRPG world, but even more so now because it's so ubiquitous and synonymous with TTRPGs at this point that somebody says TTRPG, most people don't know what you're talking about. You say Dungeons and Dragons, everybody knows what you're talking about. So back in my old consumer electronics days, many, many, many moons ago, when every MP3 player was an iPod. Because Apple just they locked down that market on branding.
Oh, yeah, it's like Kleenex. It's you mean a facial tissue? No, I don't fucking mean a facial tissue. What is that? I mean a Kleenex. Like, what are you talking about?
Kleenex. Get that puff shit out of here. Scotty's? What is this? Janitor's closet?
Hard pass. Kleenex only. I want to be sensitive of your time. I know we're coming up on our hour.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you just have a burning desire to make sure our listeners know about?
And really, the only other big thing I can't shout her out enough is Hope from Over TTRPGs. Just the work she's done in the community, you know, helping with outreach and people in kind of this indie TTRPG space, if you will. Because I never thought that I'd think of myself as an indie TTRPG creator, but I kind of am now. Never thought that would happen. And just the explosion of growth that we've all seen, in large part thanks to her, and then, you know, Old Gits and Dragons, who kind of started it.
Yes.
I think that any podcast that I'm on, I'm going to shout them out just because the work they did and are doing to, you know, help bring the community together for the mutual benefit of everyone else. It's one of those things where the way I view it, you know, even, you know, looking at other map makers, I don't view other map makers necessarily as my competitors, so to speak, if that makes sense. Because it's one of those things where I view it, and I've been around the business world long enough outside of this to, you know, just because somebody doesn't necessarily like the style of my product, that doesn't mean, oh, I don't want you to go buy that other person's product, because you're going to have to buy it somewhere. I'd prefer it if you bought mine, obviously. But at the same time, I don't want to view them as my competitors either, because, you know, maybe their map style is not for someone else, and then that person comes to me. You know, I don't want them dissuading someone from that. And I think that a lot of the work that Hope and, you know, Old Gits and a lot of other people in the community have done have kind of helped foster that sense of family and community within our weird little corner of social media. So once again, I can't shout them out enough just for the work that they've done there, just because it's absolutely phenomenal. And the growth rates that all of us who are kind of in that weird little corner of social media, I think, have seen in that time frame too, since all of this got started. Because it's been fairly recent since all of this kicked off in the grand scheme of things. So I can't shout them out enough with that. Just thank you, both of you. Thank you. And that's really the big stuff on my end of things. We're obviously talking about, you know, the Patreon, and, you know, if you're looking for maps, the Legion tier on my Patreon is that's where you want to go if you want a really, really good deal, because there are few deals out there better than that, except for people just giving maps away, which I know there are some map makers out there giving maps away right now.
Including you.
Including me. I do give away some maps. My wife thinks I'm crazy for doing that, but I said, you know, it's like when you go into the grocery store and they give you a sample of the cheese. They're hoping you buy the block of cheese. Granted, I want people to use the maps at the same time. I do. It's not just I want you to buy my maps. But most map makers are giving out free maps. It's one of those things that kind of comes with the territory. And in my mind, that's also a way of, you know, kind of giving back to the community too. I feel like has given so much to me in that time frame.
Your content is amazing.
Thank you.
You're just a solid, good dude. You're helping the community out in your own way too. So thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for doing all that you do. I really appreciate your time, and that you're just you're a joy to talk to. I hope you come back on the show sometime.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate you. Awesome to talk to as well. I had a great time. Thank you for letting me go on my random tangents about Rangers.
You were going to do it, or I was going to do it. Somebody was talking about Rangers today.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
All right, man. Hey, thank you so much again. Have a good night.
You too. Thank you.
And that does it for this week's episode. Thank you for listening. I also want to thank Eric Parker of Maps and Quest for being such an excellent guest, and I hope he'll come back to rant more about Rangers very soon. Please follow the links in the show notes to check out his Patreon, as well as his drive-thru RPG offerings. He's made a ton of beautiful maps, and even better than that, he's offering them to the community for a really great price. He's a good one, folks, and I'm so glad to see his hard work being rewarded. As for us, you can support the Pot of Blunders in a couple different ways. You can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, which will help us spread the word about fantastic indie designers like Eric. And if you want to, you can also become a patron. Yeah, that's right, you can do it. We've got a variety of levels to fit just about any budget, and we're offering some really good stuff out there. We've got exclusive podcast content. We've got a game out there that I made called Lucha Librum, which is a wizard luchador wrestling game for 2 players. It's amazing. I think it's good. We also have a Discord you can join too. It's really fun, it's really active, and it's a hoot. An absolute hoot. Or if you don't want to do any of those things, you could always go out and plant a tree. I mean, that's not like a direct line of support for the podcast, but in the long run, I think it'll help. Once again, thank you very much for listening. I've been your host, Nate Magnuski, and as always, may all your Ds be 12s. there's no bloops on this one. But the thing about podcasts is you can just say whatever you want on a microphone and record it. Schenectady. Horticulture. Moist. Yeah, just really anything.